board work is incredibly important. I want to start with that. It's one of the places where people who haven't been on the inside of a meeting like that, or have experienced maybe an organization that isn't quite as good at doing governance as maybe another, that they don't realize the great impact that they can possibly have. I would argue, and I'll make the argument through this, that it's actually one of the best ways to serve your community, because a few hours goes a long ways to empowering organizations. Imagine being a part of the House of Blessing Board of Directors and the gratification of knowing that that organization can be successful to help people in this community because you're giving that kind of service, and it's needed. Organizations struggle to find enough volunteers to fill these roles, and I hope that a few of you are inspired to join maybe the Rotary Board or a few others as a result of the presentation. So begin with, I want to help you understand something about boards, just in general. There is a spectrum in terms of how they operate, and perhaps this is natural to you, but I want to make sure that you understand that on the one hand, you have rather large organizations, and on the other hand, you have rather small organizations. So I'm going to put somebody on the spot and see if you can come up with an example of a large organization that has a board in this community. How about Diane? She's right there.
Oh, a large organization.
Yeah.
Well,
large organization with a board.
That would be like the United Way.
Okay, all right. That's an interesting example. Anyone else? What do you think about that? Jean? Jean's about to talk. She needs to.
And I was going to say the city of Stratford.
Okay. Yeah, that's a municipal organization, so a little bit different than what I'm thinking about. But yeah, Jean, what were you going to say? Unmute yourself there if you don't mind.
What about the Y?
Yeah.
Y, yes.
Another organization that's in town. Yep. Can anyone think of something bigger? Stacy.
The festival? Yeah.
That's a great example of that would be one of the largest not-for-profit organizations in this community. Over 1,000 people employed, at the Stratford Festival, which of course makes us sad for many reasons for what's going on right now. But that's a great example. How about a small organization? Can anybody think of a really small organization?
The House of Blessing.
Okay, yeah, that's a good example. How about even smaller than the House of Blessing?
Oh, what about our club?
Yeah, great example. Okay, so this club, how many staff do you have?
0.
Right, there you go. Okay.
All volunteers.
That's right. So on the one end of the spectrum, I would say are small organizations that don't have staff. And on the other end of the spectrum are organizations like the Stratford Festival who have many staff. So you're all not-for-profit organizations, though, and have to work under the same rules and compliance and all those kinds of things. You have to fill out the same forms for CRA to make sure that they get all the information they need every year so you can keep your charitable status. And yet organizations operate quite a bit differently. So on the top of this particular slide, you'll also see that on one side I've got something called a policy board, and on the other side I've got something called a working board. Anyone want to venture a guess the difference between those two things?
Well, a policy board, they would do just that. They set the policy, and then the employees then would carry that out. Whereas the working board would be, well, you set the policy and you also, work to put all of that into effect, such as our club.
That's a good description. Thank you for that. So you can see that my point here is that governance is really a spectrum, okay? And there's not a right or wrong answer about where you land on that spectrum per se. It is generally a function of how large or small your organization is in terms of how you operate. So a very small organization does absolutely everything, right? You do everything that would be determined as operational. For example, at a very small organization, you would do, you'd write all the checks, right? In your organization, you do that, right? You don't have a staff person that is in an office that's writing checks for you. On the other hand, at a large organization, the board of directors at the festival, they have nothing to do with day-to-day operations, right? They set policies, they set vision, they set guidance, and all those kinds of things. So there is a difference. However, even with all those differences in mind, some of the basic things that boards are responsible for are not different from small to large. Boards are still responsible for things like setting the vision and the direction for the organization, regardless of the size. Sure, at the Stratford Festival, you can bet that Anita and Anthony give substantial input into the vision and direction of the organization and other staff members in their leadership team. But I can also tell you that the board is responsible for setting that direction and charged with making sure that they're moving the organization forward in that way. At a smaller organization like yours, vision, setting direction, planning, all those kinds of things happen at your board level. Some of the most exciting parts of being a part of a governance, or part of the governance of any organization, large or small, is actually doing that future work, thinking where it needs to go. And the real trick with a small organization is to spend enough time on that instead of just on the day-to-day operation. You have to be disciplined in your meetings and make sure that there's time set aside for future thinking and so forth. And when that happens, I tell you that most board members are much happier when we're spending our time on longer term thinking, real impact of the organization, those kinds of things. Whether your organization is big or small, that makes a big difference in terms of how people perceive the organization. So where are we on the governance spectrum? Again, it sort of moves depending on the side of your organization. I would say that the organizations like the United Way and the Y here are somewhere in the middle in terms of the spectrum. We have much smaller organizations. We have much larger organizations. So why join a board? Here's one of the things I want to share with you. Well, here's a few reasons. First of all, you know, when you wake up in the morning, you probably have something that's important to you. You wouldn't be at Rotary if you didn't, right? It's a cause that matters to you, right? You don't come here simply because of the breakfast you used to eat, right? Because you're still on, even without the breakfast, I can tell, right? You're all here without the great food at the Queen's, right? But the most important thing to keep in mind is that you can connect with a cause that matters to you, right? We all have life experiences, and there are so many charities in our community that need help. And probably all of you have some kind of life experience that draws you to one charity or another. And it is a really great opportunity to get inside an organization, to be at the board level and to understand exactly what they're doing and to have a hand in shaping the future direction as you support an organization. So I think that's a critically important reason. The next reason I've alluded to already is around impact. Those of you who think about what you can do with your time and how you can best serve, I want to challenge you to keep in mind that, you know, sort of time versus investment. If you're on an organization that is doing reasonably well, I mean, there's organizations that don't run themselves all that well, and maybe this isn't the case absolutely every time, but if you're on a board that's at least doing a reasonable job, the impact of your investment of time versus what the organization is able to accomplish is really significant. Probably no better ratio. You know, if I give a few hours to a board per month or so forth, compared to what that organization is able to accomplish, the impact is enormous, and they can't do it without you. So giving that time is critically important. Perhaps you would rather, you know, be at the House of Blessing sorting groceries or something like that, or sorting clothing for people in the community, and you'd rather do something more hands-on. I certainly recognize that not all of us like to do governance. Some of us like to be more hands-on, but I would argue that one of the things that you can do to help your community the most is actually to join a board, because of the amount of impact that is given out by these organizations, relatively speaking to the minimal time that people put in. I'm not saying it's a small commitment to join a board, but relative to the entire work of, say, an organization like the Y in our town, if you were to join their board, although you can't anymore because they're amalgamating with a larger region, well, maybe you could, but you'd be on a much larger board. Or the House of Blessing, which is a centrally or locally focused organization, for example. It's just an incredible way of looking at things. Another critical part of joining boards, oftentimes people will look at it as a personal growth and learning opportunity, and maybe you wouldn't even think of that when you joined. I know many of board members that I've been involved with over the years have been really critical or have been really happy with how they have grown as a result of the experience, and they didn't expect it. They came there for the first reason. They wanted to get close to a cause that mattered to them, and what they realized is that they actually also got a lot out of it. There's many things in life like this, right? We think we're going to give, and we actually end up receiving. And I think that is certainly true around a board table because of the interaction that you have with other peers, and their ideas and the ideas of the organization and the good work the organization is doing. I don't think you can help but grow if you're around a table, and if you have to go through a bit of consternation trying to make a decision, that's not such a bad thing. That's actually personal growth too. The learning, of course, is really important for anyone who's thinking of trying to expand their resume. I know there's a lot of people that join boards for this reason, and it's a good reason. You know, we shouldn't see it as selfish. We should see it as a way for people to grow into their roles, to learn and to get experience and so forth. And so perhaps you're younger and you're thinking, how can I advance my career? Or perhaps you simply want to learn and grow. And I think being a part of a board is a fantastic opportunity. Where do you get the high level experience, you know, that crosses topics that are important to running every organization in business? You know, that can be better. What a great crucible, you know, where you learn everything from how to read a financial statement, because you have to if you're going to be a board person, to understand at least whether or not the organization is in the hole or on the right side of the ledger, or whether or not you can understand how to move an organization through change, right? If you're part of a conversation that's leading an organization toward the future. First of all, or next on the list, I want to say that networking and personal relationship building is critically important. And board members continue to tell me that one of the main reasons why they stay on boards that are healthy and are doing well is because of the relationships that they build. I was talking to my board chair last night, who mentioned he was speaking to another board member just the other day, and they were talking about the challenges that board member was having in his personal life. His spouse was in cancer treatment. What a support network it is to have more and more people who care about each other in our community. And a lot of that relationship building can happen around a board table. So it's about networking in terms of relationship support. But if you're in the market for a new job, you're in the market to change jobs, or you just want to learn to grow and perhaps move on, it's also a great place to meet people. People join Rotary for this reason all the time, right? You know, we believe it's a great place for networking. It's a great place for businesses to connect with businesses. Of course, service above self is the main principle at Rotary. However, you know, people are also there to further their own careers and their own ends as well. And so there's nothing wrong with saying that that's part of the reason why you're joining a board, as long as it's not the only reason that you're joining a board, I would say. Finally, I think it's fun. If you get onto a board, you can learn a lot. You can have a lot of fun. At least at the United Way board, I know our board members have a great time. It's been a little tougher to do some of that in our virtual world of having Zoom meetings for the last number of months. But even at a recent meeting, they decided that they were going to have 4 people share a challenging life story, and it was really interesting to hear what people came up with and shared. Some of it was funny, some of it was really hard to hear, you know, difficult things that happened in their lives, but people got to know each other better, and I think it was a great way to do things. And so governance can be fun. How's that for a statement? So how else can it be fun? Well, I want to kind of finish our talk with wrapping up some principles around governments, and helping you understand that there's really sort of 3 main things that board members do when they're on a board. One is they are involved in what's known as sort of the fiduciary work. Probably you've heard of that word before. It's basically the main thing that people think of when they think about boards. I'm responsible to make sure that this organization doesn't screw up. You know, so you know, I've got a fiduciary duty to make sure that I represent the public as a trustee, to make sure that you know, nothing untoward is happening around this table, all that sort of stuff. Fiduciary duty. It's making sure that the T3010B gets filed on time. It's making sure that there isn't you know, some kind of scandal happening where somebody's stealing money at the front desk of an organization. It's all those kinds of things that come under fiduciary duty. It's an important aspect of what we do. But I would argue that it's only one part of what a board does, and typically people think that that's far more significant than it is. Here, we've got a pie chart that suggests to you that it's the second of 3 different types. The other one that you're probably going to be familiar with, although it's been only referred to slightly so far, is the idea of strategic, the strategic quadrant here. So that's the direction setting aspect of what you do at a board. And I think it's one of the most exciting parts of what a board can do. When you have an opportunity to rethink and reimagine the future and talk about where the organization is going and why it's going to get there, strategic planning and all the things around that are critically important for board members to invest in. And so spending as much time on that as you do on the fiduciary stuff, on the day-to-day stuff that has to get done, is critically important. Finally, the third aspect that is least talked about with governance is this idea of governance as leadership. And so what it means is that you're trying to lead the board through generative discussions. Okay, so the third quadrant on here, that's kind of a bad language thing, isn't it? Anyway, the third section of the pie here is called generative because it represents how governance is done as much as it is the what. And so when you set an agenda around the governance table and you make sure that there's time for good question, good discussion, you are beginning to touch on what this means. Generative leadership is really about the culture of a board and about how things happen around that table, ensuring that people are engaged in the conversation. And you may say, well, that's not really a function of the board. You may say, well, that's just, you know, luck, whether or not you get the right people around the table. And I say, no, that's not true. It's actually part of the work of the board to make sure this happens. Some of you probably are familiar with organizations that are a little bit larger boards, and they actually have a governance committee. They are actually charged with things like board culture, board recruitment, those kinds of things. And so in a smaller organization, that has to happen around the main table, but it is still part of your function. It's things like making sure that we understand the good, the bad, and the ugly that's happening around this table. You know, did we have a good meeting or not? Just a little analysis around that. Are board members contributing? Yes or no? And there's lots of sophisticated ways of doing those things, or maybe just a short discussion at an end of meeting. But when you design your board meetings around generative thinking, creating a culture that helps the organization to move forward and to have good, healthy conflict around that table, managed well by a strong chair, then you are actually beginning to lead as an organization, as opposed to just crossing the T's and dotting the I's because, oh good, we've executed, we've filed the T3010 on time, or even checking the box off to say, hey, we have a mission statement. You know, it's just not enough. We have to push further and have the right kind of conversations around our board table. So generative is more than productive or logical. It's how we do our work. It embodies the values. It's latent in the culture. It's demonstrated in the pursuit of a better future. It creates space for boards to discover what problems need solving and what preferred futures might look like. So it's a critically important aspect of what I believe is good governance. And when you do that, I think the 5 reasons I shared before for joining a board are much more possible for organizations to have all the good outcomes that they can.